Hi, and welcome to this special edition of MyMetroTV.com. I'm Frederick Knight. Thank you for joining us this morning. Got a great show on tap for you. Coming to you from the grounds of the Vote 50th birthday celebration for the president. Talking about voters organized to educate. We'll bring you sights and sounds from the event. Also on the way, Michelle stops by with Parenting Solo. And I've got my conversation with the board of directors. Their new book, The Makings of a Man. All that and more coming up on this special edition of MyMetroTV.com. Daybreak, first stop to the rest of the weekend.
Welcome to this edition of Parenting Solo on MyMetroTV.com. Daybreak, your first stop to the rest of the weekend. My guest this morning is Carmen HamptonJulious, the Executive Director of the Palmetto AIDS Life Support Services. Welcome, Carmen. Thank you so much for joining us.
Thank you for having me, Michelle.
Now, as parents, we would like to think that our kids are not having sex, but Carmen, we know that's not the case. So surprise me this morning. What is the most startling thing that we as parents need to know about our children and their sexual behavior?
Well, first of all, let me say that you, like all parents, want to think that our children are being abstinent, that they are postponing sex and postponing sexual decision making until whatever time the parent thinks they should. But what we know is that that is not happening. And so it's very important for us to make sure that our teenagers, our youth, have good decision-making skills when it comes to sexual decision-making. And one of the facts I think that parents don't realize or understand is that youth don't know that they are at risk for HIV, at risk for other sexually transmitted infections, or at risk for unplanned pregnancy. And you know, again, when you're a youth, when you're a teen, you always think that nothing bad is going to happen to you. So you're more inclined to take risk. You're more inclined to you know, have an attitude of, oh, that happens to other people, it doesn't happen to me. And that is something that is very risky for our youth. And it's very risky to not give those youth accurate information about sex, sexual behaviors, and risk-taking behaviors. And so I think that parents need to know that what we found is that among African-American youth, condom use has increased.
It has increased.
It has increased, and we find that very hopeful. Now, it hasn't increased as much as we would like to see it, but it has increased, and we find that hopeful because it seems that when youth have information about how to protect themselves, how to stay healthy, they use that information in their best interest. So that's hopeful for us, and that's something that we would like to see continue to happen
and to increase and further increase.
Oh, definitely.
Well, when we start talking about how to affect that increase in condom use, I mean, how do we start those conversations? How do we talk to children younger than teens about condom use and responsible sexual choices?
Well, I think that you may not want to start out with younger kids talking about condom use, but certainly when your child is 5, 6, 7, 8, 9, 10 years old, we talk to them about hygiene. We talk to them about respecting themselves, respecting their bodies, and I would like for us to add to that conversation protecting their bodies. When kids are younger, we teach them certain safety behaviors. We teach them things like how to cross the street. And so when you teach your child how to cross the street, you're not telling your child, go play in traffic now because I've taught you to cross the street. But what you're doing is you're teaching that child to be able to cross the street safely, so that when you're not there and that child needs to cross the street, he has the knowledge and the skill and the expertise to cross the street and be safe. So, you know, we say the same things with sexual behavior. When our kids are younger, we want to talk to them about respecting their bodies. We want to talk to them about touches. You know, some touches are good touches, like a hug from a parent. Some touches are bad touches. And we want to teach them how to distinguish between good touches and bad touches. And that begins the conversation. That begins the ability for the parent to bring in other subjects as the child matures and gets older. So that by the time the child is a young teen or a tween, you can begin to talk about things about sexual behavior and consequences of sexual decision making. You want to make sure, of course, that your child has a good grasp of what your family's beliefs are and incorporate that into that discussion about decision making. The other piece to that is that we want to make sure that youth have accurate information about HIV. We see some infections that result in just kids not having truthful information about HIV infection. And of course, if any parent needs information about HIV, they can of course call us or other health department, other serving organizations that have that information, and make sure that the parent themselves has accurate information, so and they can pass it on to their kids. Right.
Well, not just HIV, but there are so many sexually transmitted diseases that our teens are at risk for because there's so much misinformation out there. Teens are talking to each other, there's social media, and they're going to the internet for answers and that sort of thing. So, for instance, oral sex puts so many of our teens at risk because they don't really consider that real sex.
Yeah, I think sometimes we all have different definitions of what is sex and what isn't sex. So we have a lot of, again, misinformation among our youth, and they pass it from one to the other. So a lot of times when we talk about oral sexual behavior and even anal sexual behavior, teens don't define that as real sex. But we have to know that sexual behavior includes all of that. We also talk about some what we call non-invasive sexual behaviors, or some non-invasive behaviors where teens can show intimacy that don't involve sexual behavior. Things like hugging, things like holding hands, those kinds of things where you can show intimacy but don't necessarily have to be involved in intimate sex. And we need to promote that more, not only from an agency point of view, but from a family point of view. There's nothing wrong with showing someone that you care for them by hugging, touching their arm, rubbing, holding hands, that kind of thing.
Well, Carmen, how do you counsel parents to start that conversation? How do you get them to talk to their teens when they seem like they're ready to start having sex?
Well, a lot of times teens are waiting for the parent to bring up the subject, but parents are afraid to bring up the subject because it's uncomfortable. So I'm not downplaying that. I know it's not an easy conversation to begin, but it's one that you have to have. And so I think that when the teens are waiting to get their cue from the parents, we just have to just be the parent, take the initiative, maybe beforehand get some tips and get some information and make sure you have it for the youth. Maybe get some brochures that you can read together, go to a reputable website maybe and look at it together. But I can't tell you that it's going to be easy to have that conversation, but I can tell you that once you start it the first time, it's easier to have it the second time. And I've had a lot of parents that say, well, my kid doesn't talk to me about anything. But what I say to them is that sometimes it's more important that your kid listens rather than talks. It's difficult for the kid to understand that, and you have a lot of more years of experience and expertise than the kid does. So sometimes you just may need to just bite the bullet, bring up the conversation in whatever way you need to, using brochures, using an example of something that happened in the news, using an example of something you saw on the internet. Go ahead and begin the conversation, and after that it does get easier.
Great information. Thank you, Carmen, for joining us.
Thank you for having me, Michelle, and have me back anytime. I'd be glad to come.
And thank you for joining us as well. And remember, if you have a question or comment or would like to be a guest on Parenting Solo, email me at go4gospel@aol.com. That's go4gospel@aol.com. Or you can go to the mymetrotv.com website and leave your information in the comments section. Thank you so much, and join us again for our next edition of Parenting Solo on mymetrotv.com Daybreak, your first stop to the rest of the weekend.
I recently had the opportunity to sit down with Jabari S, Michael Holoman, and Gerard Droze, collectively known as the Board of Directors, to talk about their new book, The Makings of a Man. I sat down with the gentlemen to find out about the board and the book.
Well, we all used to be co-workers at a very large, well-known company here in the area, and through those our friendship there at the company, we often went to lunch together a lot. Every Friday, we used to meet up for lunch at different places. During those lunch conversations, we talked about numerous topics. A lot of those topics end up being about the issues of manhood. And during those discussions, we found out we had a lot in common as far as not our backgrounds, but as what we thought about what manhood was really about.
Okay, now tell me this. You guys call yourselves the Board of Directors. What was the motivation behind that?
Well, it's not actually something that we came up with on our own. We actually used to attend a weekly worship service called Power Lunch on Percival Road at the Meeting Place Church International. And one of the guys there actually saw us every Wednesday sitting around the table having lunch, discussing business and whatnot. And he said that we looked like a board of directors. So that name kind of stuck with us, and we've been using it ever since.
Okay. Now that the board of directors is in place, what was the motivation for the book?
Well, like Mike said, we were lunch buddies and we would all get together, and a lot of times the topic of manhood would pop up in our lunch conversations, you know, along with other things. And we all kind of wondered, even though we all come from different backgrounds, you know, Gerard comes from a two-parent household, I come from a single father household, Mike comes from a single mother household, and somehow we all arrived at the same place when it came to our ideas of manhood. And we were kind of curious about that, and we figured, you know, if we can all have different backgrounds and still kind of arrive at a certain positive place, you know, we ought to be able to come together like minds and share that experience with other people through a book.
Okay. Now, when you put the book together, you said you had dealt with manhood issues previously. What are you trying to accomplish with the book? What are you hoping folks will take away from the book?
Well, we hope that young men understand that being a man is not about your money, it's not about your cars, your fancy house, how many girlfriends you have and whatnot. It's about who you are as a person, how you carry yourself and handle your responsibilities. You know, are you trustworthy? Are you someone who is a good listener? Do you communicate well? Do you plan things? You think ahead? Things of that sort. The things that are less tangible than those material goods that seem to be so prevalent in today's society. I want them to know this about your character, not what you actually possess physically.
And if folks want to get a copy of the book or get in touch with you guys, how would they go about doing so?
The book's available on our website, which is www.themakingsofAman.com. You can find us also on Facebook at facebook.com/board of directors. And we're on twitter.com/thetrueboard.